Today we're going to make brisket. But this is not just any brisket. This is easily the best brisket you will ever have, at least if you smoke it. However, you can do it even in the oven. It's very simple, has simple seasonings, and it does take a long time to cook, but it's totally worth it. Let's take a look.
Alright, now for this brisket, you're going to need just 5 ingredients. That's all you're going to need. So first and foremost, you're going to need a brisket.
Now this is a third of a brisket. I got a full-size brisket from Sam's Club, just chopped it into 3 separate pieces. This is the largest end of the brisket. We'll get this trimmed a bit, but not completely.
And then to that, we will add some salt.
Some black pepper, some garlic. There will be more than this. That's just what I have right now.
Granulated onion as well. That's all we need for this brisket.
So what we're gonna do is first we'll go ahead and lay out some butcher paper. We'll trim the brisket and then we'll season it. Let's get started. All right, so we've got our butcher paper laid out. We're gonna go ahead and get this brisket out of the bag. And if you're wondering why I'm only wearing one glove,
I'm gonna be using one hand to handle the raw meat and then using the other hand to cut the fat, trim it down a bit, and to season it.
Now, one thing to keep in mind when it comes to brisket.
Now, a lot of people will trim down the fat to where you do not have much of anything left on it. You can see here, we have a huge amount of fat here.
Now, we're not going to trim all of that. We just want to make sure that we trim enough to where it's not excessive. Because the reality is, the more fat you have, the more flavor. However, you also don't want to be in a position, even after the 18 hours it takes to cook this, that you are just chewing fat and nothing else. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to trim some of that fat out.
A lot of that is hard to tell how deep the fat goes, but we will trim it as best as we can.
Alright, so now we got brisket pretty well trimmed. There's still quite a bit of fat on here, but we don't want to trim all of it. We just want to get enough out to where it's not too much, but you still want to have especially plenty on the top part of the brisket because that's where the flavor is going to happen the most, because the flavor is going to be melting down into the brisket as it cooks. So now that we are done getting all the fat trimmed, we will set that aside because we can still use that to make beef tallow. We may or may not do that during this video, but we'll go ahead and start getting that seasoned. All right, so now with the seasoning, we're just gonna be doing generous amounts of salt and pepper, onion powder, and garlic powder on all sides of the meat.
And I really do mean be pretty generous. More than you think you would need, because the reality is this is going to season a large piece of meat.
Now, obviously, if you're using like the flab of the brisket, which is what a lot of people end up using, that's typically what you'll find like when you get corned beef, for example, then you're not going to need as much seasoning. But you basically just want it to be coated in such a way that it has a chance to really seep through the meat. And I just make sure you cover the whole thing. So we'll do that. I usually try to do the black pepper last of all because that's the part that that I like to have on the outside more.
One thing I want to note is that I do not do measurements for this because a lot of it is going to be seasoning to taste.
Just keep in mind that if you are generous with it, you are very likely to have what you need.
But if we were going to give measurements, I would probably say doing roughly about 1 teaspoon to 2 teaspoons for the top and bottom of the brisket. So I would say probably altogether about 1 to 2 tablespoons for the larger part of the brisket. If you are doing a flat, probably about half that amount. Either way, you want to coat it generously, and when it looks something like this, you'll know that you have what you need.
All right, so that's basically all we need as far as seasonings go. One thing I do want to note, if you do not want to do these seasonings, you can obviously do a pre-made rub, anything like that. Personally, of all the different things I've tried, and I've tried 5 or 6 different ways to season the brisket, even doing something as simple as salt and pepper, this blend of salt, pepper, onion powder, and garlic powder is pretty much perfect. Like, it comes out excellent every single time, as long as it's cooked correctly. And it's very simple, very easy ingredients to have available.
So we're going to wrap this up in the butcher paper. It doesn't have to fit perfectly because we're going to use a separate set of butcher paper to wrap it up after it has cooked a bit in the smoker.
But what we're going to do now, and this is technically optional, is we're going to stick this back in the bag that we originally had it in. If you don't already have a bag for it, just get a gallon-sized freezer bag. That should be about what you need. And we're just going to let it sit in the fridge for 2 to 3 hours before we stick it into the smoker. Now, of course, once again, you can skip the step of putting it back in the fridge, but I am going to do that because I always find it just kind of enhances the flavor a bit more.
You could even do it overnight if you wanted to. But since we are going to be cooking this overnight, we are going to start this evening, and then it is going to cook until sometime tomorrow afternoon. We are just going to go ahead and put this in the fridge for a couple of hours.
We'll stick that in the fridge now, and then we'll come back to it. All right, so it's been a couple hours since we put the brisket in the fridge. So now we're going to go ahead and pull it back out of the bag. And we'll unwrap it. Seasoning has settled in pretty nicely. And then this is going to be really important. Put a probe thermometer in it.
Now, during the cooking time, you are going to want to get up to an internal temperature of 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is just the initial part of the cooking.
So, if you're doing this in a smoker or an oven, regardless of which way you do it, you want to start off at 250 degrees, and then you're just going to cook it until it gets to an internal temperature of 160. Once you get to the internal temperature of 160, we'll come back, of course, but we'll be wrapping it at that point, and then we will cook it at 200 for the remainder of the time. Now, a couple things I want to note. Number one, of course, if you're doing this in the smoker, use whatever kind of chips you like. Personally, my favorites tend to be things like
Mesquite or hickory.
This time I'm actually doing a blend of hickory, apple, and pecan. So it should be really good, a really nice smoke blend, and we'll go ahead and get that going here momentarily.
If you're not doing it in a smoker, obviously you do not have to worry about that. You could technically do something like liquid smoke, but I've never tried that, so I cannot guarantee it's going to be that great.
It should still turn out really good, even cooked in the oven. It just won't have that extra smoke flavor, and you probably won't necessarily get the outer bark that you get cooking it in the smoker.
So we're going to go ahead and take this out to our smoker, and when we come back, it'll probably be like 2-3 hours that it takes to get up to 160 internal temperature, maybe more. Obviously, just keep an eye on it. We're starting this overnight, though.
So we'll come back once it gets up to 160 degrees internal temperature, and then we'll wrap it, and we'll get it ready for the remaining cooking time. Alright, so the brisket's reached an internal temperature of 160. I'm actually filming this outside because it's late at night and everybody's still asleep. But you can see that it's looking really good so far. It's got what appears to be the beginning of a very nice bark. It's going to look really good when it's finally done. But now we're going to go ahead and drop the temperature of the smoker down to 200 degrees, and then we're just going to let it go the rest of the time. This ended up taking about 6 hours to actually get this far along, but it is a big beefy boy, so it's understandable that it took considerably longer. So we'll go ahead and get this wrapped up, and then we will get it back in the smoker. All right, the brisket is finally out of the smoker. It's been about 22 and a half hours that this thing has been going. So I started it at 6 o'clock p.m. yesterday, and it took about 6 hours, which is a bit unexpected to get up to 160. And then once it got up to 160, I wrapped it, as you would have seen earlier in the video. And then after I wrapped it, I dropped the temperature from 250 down to 200, cooked it that way for about 12 hours, and then the remaining 4 hours I bumped the temperature back up to 250. Of course, I wrapped it after it got up to 160, and it's been wrapped ever since then. So we're gonna go ahead and unwrap this thing like a present, do the beautiful reveal. You'll see a lot of melted fat here. That is completely normal. This is part of why we wrap it. We still will get a really good smoke on it. And oh man, I mean, this thing is gorgeous. That beautiful bark. I think I'm gonna need to pull it off of the butcher paper so you can get like a real good idea of what this thing looks like. I mean, look at that. That is beautiful. I know it's dark on the outside. You might think it's burnt, but no, that's just the beautiful, delicious bark on this wonderful, wonderful brisket. Now we've had a chance to take a look at it in all of its glory before it's sliced. We'll go ahead and slice it, and then you'll be able to see that glorious smoke ring on the inside. All right, so in case you don't know, one of the things you always want to keep in mind when cutting any kind of meat, but especially brisket, is you want to cut against the grain. Now, because this is the fat end of the rule of thumb is the round end. That is going to be, the grain goes this way, like that, so we want to cut it like this. So we're going to go ahead and start cutting that. Oh my goodness, this stuff is so tender. It's ridiculous. It's just practically falling apart as I'm cutting it. I am struggling right now to keep it from just completely falling apart as I cut it. It's so tender. Alright, so I just want to point out a couple of quick things here, and then we're going to do the taste test. So if you look at that pink ring around the outside, you might think, oh, that's not cooked, which wouldn't make any sense because it always cooks from the outside in, but no, that's just the smoke ring. That's from that blend of hickory, apple, and pecan. So all of that pink on the outside is just that smoke ring. But now we're going to do the taste test. Alright, so my wife gets to be the one to try it first.
Salivate as it was coming out.
Oh yeah.
I went for this end piece.
Yeah, the end pieces are just... That is the best part. Because you get plenty of the bark, and then you also get so much of the flavor otherwise. And hopefully it's not too hot.
That just melts in your mouth. That is one of the best ones, I think.
Alright, so let's give this a try. I think I'm probably going to have to... Probably not going
going to go with this end piece because that's mostly fat. It'll be good, but and it will definitely just like melt in my mouth. But man, I gotta find like a good piece with plenty of color. Here we go. I tell you though, when I was cutting this, you may or may not have noticed it based on the speed of how the cutting portion came out, but this stuff was hard to cut because it was just falling apart as I was cutting it. Here we go. That is so good. I'm telling you, even though this took 22 and a half hours, I mean, not counting the time that I spent letting it sit in the fridge with the seasoning for a while and defrost time and all that before, it's so worth it. And of course, if you don't have a smoker, you can do this in the oven. You're going to get similar results. It's just not going to have necessarily the smoky flavor. Obviously, you won't have that pink smoke ring around the outside, but and you may or may not have the bark. I honestly don't know, but I'm telling you, take the time to make a brisket. It's totally worth it. And the amount of time it's going to take, it's going to vary, but trust me, keep it low and slow. It's totally worth the effort. Thanks for watching.
Please leave a like if you liked this video, subscribe to the channel and share with your friends, and stay tuned for more recipes that, while not necessarily authentic, are always delicious. And there's something else I needed to say. Alright, so the brisket is finally out of the smoker. It ended up taking quite a bit longer than I expected. It was about 6 hours just to get to the point where it was ready to, wrap. Let me start over.